Thank you all for your testimony today. Director Mulvaney brought up the issue of the debt. I'm curious to hear from all three of you, actually. There are multiple ways that you can get at the debt. You can cut spending, you can grow the economy, and you can raise revenues. Obviously, this broader body has chosen several times in recent years to cut revenues. I'd love to know from each of you what your opinion is of whether or not revenues should be part of this conversation as well as cutting spending, and what the relationship between those two things and growing the broader economy is. Starting with Dr. Edelberg, and we'll go straight across.
I'm absolutely sympathetic to the concerns about the fiscal trajectory. It's unsustainable. When you look at the spending pressures on the U.S. economy over the next 30 years, they're significant. They are largely a result of the aging population and rising healthcare costs. And those are going to be demands on the U.S. population, whether the federal government meets those demands or the private sector meets those demands. But of course, if we go the route that the federal government meets those demands, then I think it requires more revenue. So I think that the difficult question before you is, what do we want our federal government to do for us? And then how do we want to pay for it? I think revenues should absolutely be on the table. And I think thinking about all of the trade-offs for who gets harmed by spending cuts and how incentives change from increasing revenues, all of those trade-offs have to be considered. But there's no shortage of ideas. They're just difficult political questions that have to be dealt with.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. Sorry for my volume earlier. So let me just note that the U.S., again, is a relatively low-tax country compared to other countries with comparable or sometimes higher living standards. And our spending is relatively low, but not as low. So there's a gap. So we're towards the top of the bottom on spending, and we're at the bottom on taxes. So it seems to me that's quite clear that what other countries with comparable living standards have figured out is that you need to you need more revenues. U.S. has obviously had a lot of benefits with being able to borrow more cheaply than other countries, but I think we need more revenues. The final thing I'll just note is that those revenues can be used for obviously meeting the nation's needs, including some investments that have extraordinary ROI. That we're talking about things like the expanded child tax credit we had before, which had an 8-to-1 ROI that no other stakeholder could make such an investment but the United States government. So there are things we can do. It's not that everything needs to pay for itself. Sometimes we just care for people. We live our values. I appreciate Vice Chairman Schweikert's commitment to addressing poverty among the elderly and others. But there are also a lot of fantastic uses for revenues that could be cost beneficial.
Chairman.
On revenues, I think traditionally we pull between like 18 and 20% of GDP out in revenues. I think we're at the high end of that right now. I think when you say it's low compared to other countries. We're at the fairly high end of the scale right now for us. I think that's a good point. I think to answer your question, Mr. Chairman, if you go back and look, and we did this back in the Budget Committee back in 2011 and 12, we did a pretty decent investigation into fiscal consolidations, other countries, smaller countries, without a reserve currency that had been through what we anticipated then that we were going to go through. And I think the two examples we used were Canada and Australia. And what you saw was they used successful fiscal consolidations tend to have a mix of cost reduction versus revenue enhancement of about 85% to 15%. And every time I say that, people say, oh, then let's raise taxes by 15%. So that's not the point. You can get all sorts of revenue enhancement from other things such as changing deductions and so forth. We did this in the 2017 Tax Act by limiting the state and local tax deductions and so forth. So the answer to your question is everything part of the discussion? I think traditionally successful fiscal consolidations are 85 to 15 spending versus revenue.
So whether you define those as taxes or other revenues, as you pointed out, they should be on the table as part of an overall package?
I don't remember why Canada did the way that they did. It may simply be that that was the political expediency and it worked. keep in mind, those are also democracies, and they probably had to get parties from both sides to agree to something. So I don't know if it was the math and the economics that was driving it, or was politics. I'm just telling you that if you look historically to the fiscal consolidations, that seems to be the blend.